Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of Tax in 10 with me, Rachel de Souza, and Andrew Robbins. We're both tax partners in RSM's London office and have a wealth of experience in dealing with a wide range of private client matters. Your feedback is valuable to us, so do keep it coming, especially if you have thoughts on any topics you would like us to cover. We can be contacted at rachel.d'souza@rsmuk.com or andrew.robbins@rsmuk.com. Today, we're discussing offshore bonds.
Yeah, we touched on offshore bonds in last week's episodes and didn't really have the time to say much about them, so we thought it might be interesting to have a look in a bit more detail this week. And for me, largely this is because offshore bonds have very different reputations when you talk to wealth advisors compared to tax advisors. And I have to say, personally, I used to be really skeptical about offshore bonds, mainly because I thought they were a rip-off. And I think in a lot of cases, clients ended up really being fleeced, particularly by the insurance companies. The good news is that things have changed a lot in the last few years. And I find myself these days actually being quite a big fan.
Oh, that's good news. But before we get any further, perhaps we should actually explain what an offshore insurance bond is, and then we can look at its merits.
So an offshore insurance bond is actually an insurance policy. And the idea is that the value of the policy is linked to the performance of an investment portfolio. So what you do is, if I want to obtain a policy, I pay a premium to an insurance company. Typically, it's a one-off premium, and takes and invests it into a portfolio. The value that I'm going to get from my insurance policy when I cash it in at the end of the day will be based on the value of that underlying portfolio. The products are quite sort of widely available, but typically you'll find it from insurance companies in places like Luxembourg or the Isle of Man, countries where the insurance company itself won't be taxed on what's going on within the portfolio, which means that the investment can actually roll up tax-free in those jurisdictions. That's important, obviously, from the insurance company's point of view, because it means that it's not suffering tax. From the individual policy holder's point of view, the key feature of the policy is that you don't actually own an investment portfolio. You've got an insurance policy, and that means that any income or gains that are arising in the portfolio are not taxable on you. The other key advantage is that you can take out 5% of the original premium each year on a tax-free basis. And when I say tax-free, it's really you're just getting a return of your original capital investment. And if you don't use it all in 1 year, you can carry it forward. So if I took nothing out from my policy for 5 years, I could then take out 25% of my original premium tax-free in that 5th year. So there's a lot of flexibility about how you get your money back.
So that sounds all really good. There must be some downsides to holding an offshore bond. And one of the main downside is that the profit that is made on that tax-free roll-up, when it comes out to you, it will be subject to tax as income and not as capital gains. So at the moment, CGT rates are far lower than income tax rates. And so you might think that would be a bit of a turn-off. But actually, as we've discussed, in other episodes, it's possible that CGT rates are going to rise in the future. And if that is the case, then disadvantage that we've identified actually sort of starts to fall away. But it's certainly one key thing to bear in mind if you're looking at one of these products. I think the other key point is that the portfolio of underlying investments has to be managed on a discretionary basis. So you can't pick and choose what stocks are going to be part of that portfolio. And also the investments are typically collective investments, so funds effectively, rather than individual stocks and shares. And the reason for this is that if you're able to pick and choose, or you direct the insurance company to purchase particular assets, you fall into a different part of the legislation, which actually gives you very severe tax penalties for investing in this way. So great care is required to ensure that you only have those discretionary basis portfolio mix. We now know what it is and how it is taxed. So Andrew, why would anyone use them when ultimately the tax rate is higher than investing?
Last week, which is you can use the policy as a sort of a quasi-pension plan. So while you're a high earner, you take your surplus money and put it into the policy, where it's invested, and you don't get taxed on the dividends and capital gains while you've got a very high overall tax rate. Then once you're retired, you start drawing the money out using your 5% tax-free bit and some surplus on the top when you've got a very low tax rate. So it allows you to smooth out the rate that you pay tax at. A little bit more niche, but it's also really good for non-DOMs who would otherwise have to pay the tax charge to be taxed on the remittance basis. So instead of paying up to £60,000 a year not to be taxed on your foreign income or gains, you stick the money into the bond, pay the bond wrapper, very much lower in most cases. The other thing I'd mention is that it can be quite an attractive option if you're planning to retire abroad in a situation where you might be able to cash the policy in after you've left the UK. You may actually never be subject to any tax on it at all.
That indeed would be advantage. And of course, being the season of goodwill, investing in such a product is good for presents. Why do I say that? Well, in practice, let's say you put £100,000 as a premium into the offshore bond. What you're actually buying is a sliced up version of that 100,000. So it's typically be sliced up into £1,000 value mini policies. And these are just known as segments. So to all intents and purposes, you've got one investment, but it's sliced into smaller £1,000 segments. And then as the owner of that policy, I can give away a segment or a number of segments as I require, say to my grandchildren. And that means either on my death or when the policy matures, the principal and the growth associated with that particular segment belongs to the child or the grandchild. So it's a really simple way of providing an insurance or an investment type product to your family members in a manageable fashion. A great idea for Christmas stockings.
I think I'm glad I'm not in your house on Christmas Day if I'm rushing to see what my Christmas present is and it turns out to be 3 segments from an offshore insurance bond. Thank you, Mummy, just what I always wanted. Anyway, to sum up, an offshore bond isn't actually a bond at all. It's an insurance product. It is an efficient way to invest for the long term. And as Rachel has said, you can use it for estate planning as well as your own sort of pension planning.
And Christmas presents.
And Christmas presents, if you insist. Rachel, what have you got for me as a recommendation this week?
Well, it's funny you say that because you mentioned to me not long ago that you'd come across a list of the best Christmas movies. And that got me thinking. And you'll be surprised to hear that I have the DVD of a really, really old film called White Christmas. And that stars Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye, both of whom are long since dead. But generally, I put this DVD on Christmas morning, you know, when I'm actually in the kitchen prepping the turkey, but I can hear the music, I know the dialogue, and I've seen it so many times, I know what's going on. And it just gets me into that Christmas Day mood. I think it's wonderful.
Well, talking about getting into the Christmas Day spirit then, and Christmas movies, I'm going to go on the same theme with, I'm sure I saw somewhere this had been voted the best Christmas movie of all time, which is Die Hard.
What?
It's got Alan Rickman being Alan Rickman in it and totally stealing every scene. And it's got Bruce Willis at his most Bruce Willis-y in his vest, crawling around and shooting bad guys. What more could you want for Christmas Day entertainment?
Oh dear. Right, well, we'll let everyone else ponder on that one. That's brilliant. Thanks for listening, everyone. Do let us have any comments or feedback. And if you've got any better Christmas movies, please let us know. We can be contacted on rachel.d'Souza@rsmuk.com and andrew.robbins@rsmuk.com. We will see you now in the new year. Bye for now.
Yippee-ki-yay, everybody.